At 11:47 p.m., March 15, 1945, Staff Sergeant Vincent Marcasso stood in a concrete cell beneath the military prison at Shepton Mallet, England, listening to 12 condemned men argue about which death they preferred. 3 were scheduled to hang in 6 days for desertion. 4 faced firing squads for murder. 5 awaited execution for repeated insubordination that had gotten their officers killed. Outside the cell door, a British colonel held a folder containing their only alternative, a mission so suicidal that Allied command refused to order anyone to attempt it. In 72 hours, these 12 men would either be dead in a French valley or responsible for saving an entire Allied division. Hitler would personally demand answers. The British High Command would deny the mission ever happened. This is the story of Operation Desperate Measure. Vincent Marcasso came from the Bronx, specifically from a neighborhood where the 3rd Avenue L rattled windows every 8 minutes and the smell of the Harlem River mixed with coal smoke on humid days. His father worked the docks, loading cargo until a crane accident crushed his left leg in 1938. After that, Vincent became the family earner at 16, taking whatever work the neighborhood offered. He ran numbers for local bookies. He collected debts for a loan shark named Giordano, who operated out of a barber shop on 149th Street. He learned which bones broke easiest and how much pressure a man could take before he talked. The Army drafted him in 1942. They saw his record: 2 assault charges, 1 weapons possession, numerous complaints from people who'd learned not to press charges, and made him an MP. Military police put the violent kid in charge of violent men. He was good at it, too good. By 1944, he developed a reputation as the sergeant who could handle the worst prisoners, the ones who attacked guards or organized riots or tried to escape. He spoke their language. He understood their logic. He knew how to make them cooperate without leaving marks that would complicate the paperwork. In January 1945, they transferred him to Shepton Mallet, the British military prison where the Americans kept their most serious cases, death row, men awaiting execution for crimes that even wartime couldn't excuse. Marcasso hated it, not because of the violence. He'd grown up around violence. Not because of the men, most of them were exactly what the charges said they were: killers, cowards, predators who'd worn uniforms. He hated it because of the waste. He'd watched these men through the bars. Some of them built like trucks, some of them quick and mean, all of them with skills that the Army desperately needed, and he'd think about the replacement troops arriving in France. 18-year-old farm boys who'd never thrown a punch, getting torn apart in the Hurtgen forest because they hesitated or panicked or couldn't pull the trigger fast enough. The condemned men never hesitated. They'd proven that. They just needed someone who could point them at the enemy instead of their own officers. By March 1945, the prison held 43 Americans awaiting execution. Marcasso knew every file. He'd memorized the cases during the long night shifts when the only sound was boots on stone and the occasional scream from men who couldn't sleep without seeing what they'd done. Private First Class Thomas Rourke, Brooklyn, strangled a French civilian during a robbery, built like a heavyweight boxer, which he'd been before the war. 3 amateur titles in New York, hands that could crush a throat in seconds. Corporal James Harrigan, Chicago, shot his lieutenant during a retreat in the Ardennes. The lieutenant had ordered the squad to stay in an exposed position. Harrigan decided the order was suicide, and the .45 round was self-defense. The court-martial disagreed. Private Eugene Dalton, rural Alabama, deserted twice. Caught the second time in Paris with a stolen Jeep and a duffel bag full of medical supplies he'd been selling on the black market. Fast talker, knew how to disappear in a city. Sergeant First Class Jacob Peterson, Minnesota, killed 2 men in a bar fight in Southampton, both British civilians. One had made a comment about Americans. Peterson had made the comment, fatal. The British wanted him hanged. The Americans agreed to avoid an international incident. The list continued. 12 men total, all scheduled for execution between March 21st and April 2nd. All of them violent, all of them skilled in some way the army had failed to channel properly. All of them, Marcuso believed, still useful. He'd never told anyone this opinion. MPs didn't advocate for prisoners, but he watched these men and he read the casualty reports from France and he did the mathematics that no one in command seemed willing to calculate. Then, on March 14th, Colonel Edmund Hargrove arrived from London with a folder marked "Most Secret" and a problem that conventional soldiers couldn't solve. The mission had a simple objective: destroy a German rail bridge in the Vosges Mountains before March 19th. The complications made the objective nearly impossible. German forces had retreated into the Vosges in good order, establishing defensive positions that turned every valley into a killing ground. The bridge in question, designated Target Baker, 7 on the Allied maps, spanned a gorge 300 feet deep, carrying the rail line that supplied the German 19th Army. Engineers estimated the bridge could support 50 tons. Intelligence reported that the Germans moved ammunition trains across it every night, supplying the units that were slowing the Allied advance into southern Germany. Standard doctrine said to bomb it. The Army Air Forces had tried. Twice. The valley created wind conditions that made precision bombing nearly impossible. The first raid missed by 400 yards. The second raid hit the approaches but left the bridge intact. Photo reconnaissance showed the Germans had added anti-aircraft positions on both ridges and increased patrols in the valley. A third bombing raid would face concentrated flak and probably achieve the same result. Commandos could do it, in theory. A small team could infiltrate the valley, place demolition charges on the bridge supports, and destroy the structure before the Germans could respond. The British had men trained for exactly this kind of operation. The problem was getting them there. The bridge sat 12 miles behind German lines. The surrounding territory contained no Allied units, no resistance networks, no safe drop zones for paratroopers. The nearest friendly position was an American infantry company holding a village 8 miles west. Between that village and the bridge, German infantry, German armor, German artillery, and terrain that favored defense at every turn. Hills covered in pine forest, streams that became rivers with the spring thaw, roads that existed on maps but disappeared into mud in reality. British commandos could reach the bridge if they had 3 weeks to infiltrate gradually, moving at night, hiding during the day, living off the land. They didn't have 3 weeks. Intelligence intercepts suggested the Germans planned to withdraw their 19th Army within 10 days, pulling back to the Rhine and abandoning the Vosges positions. Once they withdrew, they'd blow the bridge themselves, denying it to the Allies, but also removing any military value in destroying it early. The mission had to happen within 5 days or it became pointless. A frontal assault was suicide. An infantry company attacking through 12 miles of German-held territory would be destroyed before it covered half the distance. Even if they reached the bridge, they'd be too depleted to hold it long enough for engineers to place charges. That left one option that no one in Allied command wanted to suggest officially: send a small team on a suicide mission. Get them close to the bridge any way possible, except that they probably wouldn't survive. Destroy the bridge. Colonel Hargrove had spent 3 days trying to find volunteers. He'd approached rangers. He'd approached paratroopers. He'd approached OSS operatives who specialized in sabotage. Every man he asked said yes, they'd go. Every commander said no, they couldn't spare trained personnel for a mission with near-zero survival probability. The Rangers needed every man for the push into Germany. The paratroopers were preparing for operations across the Rhine. The OSS had assets in place that couldn't be compromised for one bridge. Someone in London suggested an alternative: use men who were already dead. Not literally, but legally dead. Condemned prisoners had no future value. They weren't part of any unit's strength calculations. Their deaths were already scheduled. If they died attempting a military objective instead of dying by execution, the net result was the same for the Army's purposes. The only difference was where and how they died. Hargrove hated the idea. It violated something fundamental about military justice and human dignity. But he'd looked at the casualty projections if the bridge remained intact. Another 200 men dead or wounded in the fighting that would result from a supplied and fighting German 19th Army. He'd made the calculation that generals always make, some deaths now to prevent more deaths later. He brought the proposal to Shepton Mallet on March 14th and told Marcoso to assemble 12 prisoners who might survive long enough to reach the bridge. Marcoso read the mission file in the warden's office. He read it twice. Then he went to the cell blocks and started pulling files. Rourke, Harrigan, Dalton, Peterson. He built a list based on skills and psychology. Men who could fight. Men who could move fast, men who understood small unit tactics even if they'd use those tactics against their own side. Men who had nothing left to lose and might, possibly, see a suicide mission as preferable to a noose. By midnight on March 14th, he had 12 names. By 1 a.m., he had those 12 men in a holding cell, listening to Colonel Hargrove explain their choice. "You're here because you've been sentenced to death," Hargrove said. His voice had the clipped precision of British officer training, but fatigue roughed the edges. "The sentences will be carried out as scheduled, unless you accept an alternative. I'm authorized to offer a mission in lieu of execution. The mission involves penetrating German lines, destroying a railway bridge, and attempting to return to Allied territory. I won't lie to you. The survival probability is extremely low. Most military analysts give it less than 10%, but it's not zero. And if you survive and complete the objective, your sentences will be commuted to time served, and you'll be transferred to frontline combat units with clean records." Silence in the cell. 12 men processing the mathematics of their situation. Harrigan spoke first. "What's the catch?" "The catch is you'll probably die," Hargrove said. "But you'll die as soldiers completing a military objective rather than as criminals at the end of a rope. Your families will be told you were killed in action. Your records will be sealed. Whatever you did that brought you here will be erased, at least officially." "And if we say no?" Dalton asked. "Your executions proceed as scheduled." "When do we decide?" Rourke's voice, surprisingly soft for a man his size. "Tonight, now. I need an answer from each of you individually." Marcoso watched their faces. He'd studied these men for months. He knew what they'd choose before they spoke. All 12 said yes. Not because they believed they'd survive, because dying quickly in France seemed better than dying slowly on a scaffold. Because some of them had families who'd suffer less if the death certificate said killed in action instead of executed for murder. Because a few of them, Marcoso could see it in their eyes, still had enough pride or shame or whatever remained of their pre-war selves to prefer dying like soldiers. Hargrove accepted their answers with a nod. No ceremony, no speeches about redemption, just a simple acknowledgement that they'd made their choice and now they'd live or die with it. "Sergeant Marcoso will be your commanding officer," Hargrove said. "You'll leave tomorrow night. You have 24 hours to prepare. Use it." Then Hargrove left, taking his folder and his exhaustion back to London. Marcoso remained with 12 condemned men, who were now, technically, soldiers again. "All right," Marcoso said. "Here's how this works. I'm going to get you weapons, explosives, maps, and food. You're going to train for 24 hours straight. No sleep. We don't have time. Most of you won't make it to the bridge. Some of you will die in the drop. Some will die in the valley. A few might reach the target. I need those few to know what they're doing when they get there." "Drop," Peterson said. "We're jumping?" "You're jumping. I'm going with you. And yes, most of you have never jumped from an aircraft. You're going to learn. We have 20 years. Why are you coming?" Rourke asked. "Because someone needs to make sure you don't shoot each other before we reach the Germans." The truth was more complicated. Marcoso had volunteered because he'd suggested using condemned prisoners in the first place. He'd made the argument to Hargrove during the colonel's first visit to Shepton Mallet. He'd said these men could be useful. Now he had to prove it, which meant he had to go with them. Also, the part of him that had broken bones in the Bronx recognized something in these 12 faces that he respected, the willingness to do violence when the situation required it. The army called it murder or assault or insubordination. Marcaso called it survival. He'd rather lead men who understood survival than stand in an office and wait for the casualty report. They spent March 15th learning to jump. The RAF provided an aircraft and a crash course in parachuting that consisted of hook up your static line, jump when the light turns green, pull your reserve if the main doesn't open, try not to break your legs on landing. 5 hours of instruction, 7 practice jumps from a training tower. Then the real thing. 1 jump from a C-47 over the English countryside to prove they wouldn't freeze in the door. 2 men froze. Marcaso pushed them out. Both landed hard, but walking. Good enough. The rest of the day focused on the mission itself. Maps spread on tables. Photographs of the valley. Sketches of the bridge. Marcaso explained the route. They'd jump 15 miles from the target, assemble in the forest, move through German territory using night marches and aggressive camouflage, reach the bridge before dawn on March 19th, place charges, destroy the structure, and attempt to return west to Allied lines. Attempt, Dalton repeated. That means you don't expect us to make it back. I expect some of you to make it back, Marcaso said. The rest will cover the withdrawal. You mean die while we run. I mean hold the Germans while the demo team finishes the job. Yes, you'll probably die. But you'll die buying time for something that matters. That's more than you were going to get in 6 days. No one argued. They understood the trade. They also trained on demolitions. A British sapper named Lieutenant Graves spent 6 hours teaching them how to place charges on bridge supports, how to wire detonators, how to calculate the amount of explosive needed to collapse a structure versus merely damage it. Most of the condemned men had never touched military explosives. They learned fast. Criminal skills translated: if you could hot wire a vehicle, you could wire a detonator. If you'd ever broken into a building, you understood structural weak points. By midnight on March 15th, they were as ready as 24 hours could make them. Marcaso issued weapons: M1 Garands, .45 pistols, trench knives, grenades, and watched these men handle firearms with the practiced ease of people who'd been handling firearms their entire lives. Legal or illegal didn't matter. They knew guns. At 2 a.m. on March 16th, the truck transported them to an airfield in southern England. At 2:47 a.m., they boarded a C-47 with blackened markings and no identification. At 3:15 a.m., they took off. The jump happened at 4:23 a.m. over the Vosges Mountains, 12 miles west of the target bridge. The C-47 flew low and fast, relying on darkness and German confusion to avoid detection. The jump light turned green. Marcaso went first. Then the 12 condemned men followed, dropping into the night above occupied France. The landing killed 1 man immediately. Harrigan came down in a pine tree, his parachute tangling in the branches. He hung there for 3 seconds before the silk tore, and he dropped 40 feet onto rocks. His neck broke on impact. They found him at dawn, still in his harness, eyes open, face showing more surprise than pain. The rest assembled in a clearing 2 miles from the drop zone. Marcaso counted heads. 11 plus himself. He'd expected worse. They buried Harrigan in a shallow grave marked with a cairn of stones that would be invisible to anyone not looking for it. Move, Marcaso said. No eulogy. They didn't have time. The next 60 hours tested every skill they possessed and revealed which men would survive and which wouldn't. The Vosges terrain was worse than the map suggested. The spring thaw had turned valleys into swamps and streams into rivers. They moved through pine forests so dense that visibility dropped to 20 feet. They waded through water cold enough to steal feeling from their legs. They climbed ridges where loose shale made every step a gamble with noise and injury. German patrols were everywhere. not the static defenses that American forces had encountered in other sectors, but active reconnaissance units searching for Allied infiltrators. The Germans knew something was wrong, probably from the sound of the C-47 or from reports of parachutes spotted in the darkness. They sent infantry into the woods with orders to sweep and eliminate. The first contact happened on March 16th at 11:20 a.m., a German patrol, 8 men, moving in loose formation through a valley, to access the condemned prisoners' route. Marcoso signaled for stillness. Everyone froze. The Germans passed within 30 feet, so close that Marcoso could smell their cigarettes and hear their conversation in fragments. They didn't stop. They continued east, unaware that 13 men watched from the trees. "Lucky," Dalton whispered after they'd moved on. "Luck runs out," Marcoso said. "We need to move faster." They covered 8 miles in the first 24 hours. Slow progress, but clean. No contact, no casualties, no evidence that the Germans had located them. They moved at night and hid during the day, in positions that offered good concealment and multiple escape routes. Marcoso rotated the watch schedule, 2 men awake, the rest sleeping in 30-minute shifts. On March 17th at 6:15 a.m., their luck ran out. They'd stopped in a depression between 2 ridges, a position that was protected but also trapped if someone approached from above. Marcoso had chosen it because exhaustion was degrading their judgment, and they needed rest more than perfect positioning. 3 men were sleeping. Peterson and Rourke were on watch. The rest were eating cold rations. German voices echoed from the ridge above, close. Getting closer. Everyone froze. Equipment secured. Weapons ready. No one breathed louder than necessary. 4 Germans appeared on the ridge, silhouetted against the dawn sky. A patrol. They stood 40 feet above the depression, looking down into the trees. One of them pointed toward the condemned prisoner's position. Marcoso made the calculation in 2 seconds. If the Germans raised an alarm, the entire area would flood with enemy troops. The mission would end here. But if they engaged, the gunfire would also bring reinforcements. He made the decision. Hand signals. Peterson and Rourke moved left. Dalton and another man named Willis moved right. Marcoso stayed center. They positioned themselves in a loose arc below the ridge, waiting for the Germans to descend. The Germans came down. Carefully, but not carefully enough. They were looking for signs of passage, not for an ambush. When the first German reached the tree line, Marcoso killed him with his trench knife. Silent. A hand over the mouth, blade between the ribs, angled up toward the heart. The German died without making a sound. Peterson and Rourke took the second man with a garrote. Quick work. Clean. The third German turned to call a warning. Dalton shot him with his .45. Single round. Close range. The shot echoed across the valley like thunder. The fourth German ran. Willis shot him in the back. 2 rounds. The German fell halfway up the ridge. "Move," Marcoso said. "Now." They grabbed essential equipment and ran east. Behind them, German voices multiplied. Whistles, shouts, the sound of a large unit mobilizing. The condemned prisoners had killed 4 men and announced their presence to every German within 2 miles. For the next 18 hours, they fought a running battle through the Vosges forests. The Germans pursued with infantry and dogs. The condemned prisoners used every trick they knew, crossing streams to break scent trails, doubling back to ambush pursuers, splitting into smaller groups and reuniting later. They lost another man named Parker when a German machine gun caught him in the open during a creek crossing. They lost Willis to a grenade during a close-range firefight in a ravine. By midnight on March 17th, they'd covered another 4 miles, and the German pursuit had finally broken contact. The enemy had given up or assumed the infiltrators were dead. Either way, the pressure eased. Marcoso counted heads again. 9 men left, including himself. They'd covered 12 miles in 48 hours, killed at least 8 Germans, and reached a position 2 miles from the target bridge. Better than he'd expected, but the casualties hurt. Every man they lost reduced their chances of completing the mission. They spent March 18th in hiding, watching the bridge from a ridge 600 feet above the valley floor. Marcoso used German binoculars to study the target, while the others rested and prepared demolitions. The bridge was a steel truss structure anchored to both sides of the gorge with concrete supports driven into the rock. The span measured approximately 200 feet. The Germans had positioned guards at both ends, 2 men at each end during daylight, doubled at night. Floodlights illuminated the structure after dark. Patrols walked the bridge every hour. "Can we take it?" Rourke asked. "We can take the guards," Marcoso said. "Question is whether we can place charges and detonate them before reinforcements arrive. The nearest German position is half a mile west. If they hear shooting, they'll respond within 10 minutes. We need to set charges in 8, and if we can't, then someone stays behind to finish the job while the rest run." No one needed to ask what staying behind meant. They moved at 2 a.m. on March 19th. The final approach took 40 minutes, crawling through underbrush, crossing open ground in short rushes, using darkness and German complacency to get within striking range of the bridge guards. At 2:44 a.m., they attacked. Marcoso and Rourke took the Eastern Guards with knives, simultaneous kills. The Germans died without raising alarm. Peterson and Dalton took the Western Guards the same way. 4 dead men, no shots fired. The bridge was theirs. For now. The demolitions team, Dalton and 2 others named Fisher and Martinez, moved onto the structure with canvas bags full of explosives. They worked fast, placing charges on the main support trusses, wiring detonators in series so one trigger would collapse the entire span. Marcoso watched them work, while the others established a perimeter defense around both ends of the bridge. At 2:51 a.m., a German patrol appeared on the road west of the bridge. 6 men, walking casually, unaware that anything was wrong. They'd probably heard nothing from the guards because the guards were dead and silent. The patrol reached the bridge approach. One of them called out a greeting in German. No response. The German stopped, confused, suspicious. Marcoso made another calculation. If they let the patrol raise an alarm, the mission failed. If they engaged, the gunfire would bring reinforcements, but they might have enough time to finish setting charges. "Kill them," he said quietly. The condemned prisoners opened fire. M1 Garens barked in the darkness. The German patrol disintegrated, 3 men dead in the first volley, the others scrambling for cover. One managing to fire a shot before Rourke cut him down with a burst from a Thompson submachine gun that someone had acquired during the running battle through the forest. Silence. 6 dead Germans, but the shots had been loud, and the nearest enemy position would have heard them. "How much longer?" Marcoso shouted toward the bridge. 5 minutes, Dalton's voice, strained with concentration. "You have 3. Gunfire erupted from the western tree line. German infantry, responding to the shots, muzzle flashes in the darkness. Bullets snapped past Marcoso's head and sparked off the bridge steel. The condemned prisoners returned fire. Short, controlled bursts, designed to suppress rather than kill. They didn't need to win this firefight. They just needed to buy time. More Germans arrived. Marcoso could hear vehicles on the road. Trucks, probably bringing infantry. The floodlights on the bridge flickered on, turning the entire gorge into a shooting gallery. Bullets ricocheted everywhere. Fisher took a round through the shoulder and kept working. Martinez worked faster, his hands steady despite the chaos around him. At 2:58 a.m., Dalton shouted, "Clear! Move!" The demolitions team scrambled off the bridge. Marcoso pulled the detonator from his pack, a simple plunger device connected to the charges by wire. He set it on the ground. "Fall back," he ordered. The condemned prisoners retreated east, firing as they moved. The Germans followed, pouring into the bridge area now that the floodlights revealed targets. Dozens of enemy soldiers, Too many to count. Too many to fight. Marcoso waited until his men were clear. Then he pushed the plunger. The bridge exploded. Not a small detonation, but a massive cascading collapse as the charges fired in sequence, severing the main trusses and sending the entire structure tumbling into the gorge. The sound was catastrophic, steel shrieking, concrete shattering, debris falling 300 feet into darkness. The floodlights went out. The entire valley plunged into chaos. Marcoso ran. They didn't stop running until dawn. The Germans pursued for the first hour, then gave up when the condemned prisoners crossed into terrain too rough for organized pursuit. By 6 a.m. on March 19th, they'd put 3 miles between themselves and the destroyed bridge. Marcoso counted heads. 7 left. They'd lost Fisher during the retreat. He'd taken too many wounds and couldn't keep pace. He'd stayed behind to cover their withdrawal, buying them time with his Thompson until the Germans silenced him. 7 survivors out of 13 who'd jumped, nearly 50% casualties. But they'd completed the mission. The bridge was gone. The German supply line was severed. Now what? Peterson asked. His face was streaked with mud and blood, his own or someone else's, Marcoso couldn't tell. Now we walk to Allied lines, Marco said. 8 miles west. If we're lucky, we make it by tomorrow. They made it by noon on March 20th. The frontline American unit, a rifle company from the 3rd Infantry Division, nearly shot them when they emerged from the forest. Marcoso convinced them to hold fire by shouting identifying information and cursing in fluent English. The company captain accepted their surrender, then their explanation, then immediately sent a runner to battalion headquarters. By evening on March 20th, Marcoso and the 6 survivors were in a military hospital 20 miles behind the lines, being treated for exposure, minor wounds, and exhaustion. By March 21st, Colonel Hargrove arrived with new orders and official documentation. The mission had succeeded. Photo reconnaissance confirmed the bridge's destruction. German communications intercepted by Allied intelligence showed confusion and anger at the loss. Hitler himself had reportedly demanded an explanation for how Allied saboteurs had penetrated 12 miles behind German lines and destroyed a critical rail bridge. The German 19th Army's supply situation had deteriorated dramatically. Their withdrawal accelerated. American forces advanced into the Vosges with minimal resistance. The 6 survivors, Rourke, Peterson, Dalton, Martinez, and 2 others named Hammond and Sabo, received transfers to frontline infantry units with their records expunged. No mention of their previous crimes. No mention of death sentences. Just clean service records and a notation that they'd volunteered for a classified special operation. Marcoso received a promotion to staff sergeant and a reassignment to a ranger battalion. He never saw the 6 survivors again. He heard later that Rourke died in Germany during the final weeks of the war. Peterson survived and returned to Minnesota. The others scattered into the post-war chaos and disappeared from official records. The operation remained classified until 1963, when a military historian researching unconventional tactics during World War II found references to Operation Desperate Measure in British archives. The file had been sealed for 18 years. When declassified, it revealed the mission's true nature. 12 condemned prisoners given a choice between execution and a suicide mission, 6 of whom survived to receive pardons and clean records. The story generated brief controversy. Some historians argued it was unethical to offer condemned men false hope of survival. Others argued it was practical. Men who were going to die anyway had been given a chance to die usefully. The debate faded within weeks, overwhelmed by other World War II revelations that seemed more significant. The destroyed bridge was never rebuilt. The valley it had spanned became part of a French national forest. Hikers occasionally find rusted steel fragments in the gorge, remnants of the structure that once carried German supply trains. Vincent Marcuso left the army in 1946 and returned to the Bronx. He worked construction for 30 years, building the same types of bridges he'd once destroyed. He died in 1978 at age 56 from a heart attack. His obituary in the New York Times mentioned his military service in one sentence: Mr. Marcasso served with distinction in Europe during World War II. No mention of Shepton Mallet, no mention of condemned prisoners or suicide missions. No mention of the night he pushed 12 men out of an aircraft and led 6 of them back to Allied lines. The 6 survivors never spoke publicly about the operation. A few researchers tried to interview them in the 1970s and 80s, all refused. Work's brother, when asked about Thomas Work's war service, said only, "He did what he had to do. That's all anyone needs to know." Modern military historians estimate that Operation Desperate Measure saved between 200 and 400 Allied casualties by accelerating the German withdrawal from the Vosges. The bridge's destruction disrupted ammunition supplies at a critical moment when the German 19th Army was already struggling with logistics and morale. Whether this justifies sending condemned men on a suicide mission remains debatable. What's not debatable is that it worked. 12 men who were supposed to die on scaffolds died instead in French valleys and forests, fighting Germans instead of waiting for executioners. 6 of them survived long enough to receive a second chance. Some of them used that chance well, others didn't. But they got the chance, which is more than they'd had in their cells at Shepton Mallet. That's how redemption actually works in war. Not through dramatic speeches or official ceremonies, but through desperate choices offered to desperate men who have nothing left to lose except the manner of their dying. If you found this story compelling, please like this video, subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Thank you for keeping these stories alive.